for joining us, the Wealthy Retailer Podcast with your host, Dan Holman. Every episode, Dan dives into the retail headlines that matter to you, the independent retailer, covering topics ranging from retailer inventory, technology, marketing, retailers' questions, and more. The Wealthy Retailer Podcast is brought to you by Canadian Retail Solutions. Learn more at retailbycrs.com. And now, here's Dan Holman.
Hey, good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Wealthy Retailer Podcast for the week of July 22nd. Sort of that middle of summer, Rob,
Cruising
maybe?
into the middle of summer. Yep.
Yeah. How you doing this week? Yeah. Rocking along here. It's been a fun couple of weeks in the retail world.
Yeah, things are getting busy, but I know too that everyone's trying to find a little time to recharge the batteries where they can, and I think that lends itself to one of the retailer question this week. Kind of falls into that boat a little bit.
So on point, this question this week for sure.
Yeah, totally. So yeah, some good stories this week. You know, this first one, Dan, reminds me of my accountant. He always told me, Rob, there's 3 types of accountants in this world: good ones and bad ones. So we got a story about statistics. What statistics do you want to know? But Dan's got some retail ones that definitely I know folks will want to listen into. Another story about 6 ways to protect your business from the next disaster, and good little story. And hey, there's always going to be something coming down the road to get ready for. And then building that team, that war for talent, and what you can do there. And as we said, retailer question, dealing with a bit about burnout and recharging the batteries the right way, and I look forward to your thoughts on that. Okay, sir. Yeah, back to those statistics from smallbiztrends.com. Story about retail statistics you should know, and I'm curious to hear what jumped out at you from this story, Dan.
Well, I mean, the first thing that jumped out at me is, oh my God, can you throw any more numbers at us? And Sandeep Rathore published this article about 10 days ago, as you said, in Small Biz Trends. And it did contain some interesting and notable facts, stats, and figures about our world of retail, and more specifically, indie retail. And they've assembled all the numbers we might need to know, including a ton we maybe don't need to know. And that's part of the power in having, I'm going to just maybe sidetrack a little bit. Part of the power in having a good mentor, a good coach, someone that's in your corner, we really are, think about panning for gold, right? We're that screen, we're the pan. We sift through all the shit to get the good stuff out of it. And this article, while really well written, a ton of really good links to other statistics and facts, it needs to be sifted through. You really got to get your gold pan out and understand what information is relevant to me, which isn't. Do I just want to clog myself up with a bunch of numbers? Okay. So,
let's hear those nuggets you found.
Yeah. So they've highlighted some store operations, some shopper behaviors, some about how other retailers are marketing their business, and a ton more. So Rob will make sure there's a link to this in our weekly newsletter. But here's a few stats that caught my attention and maybe even gave me this bit of a warm, fuzzy feeling. The NRF, National Retail Federation, reported U.S. sales in 2020 grew by almost 7% and are on pace to double this year. More importantly than that, and this number is true in Canada as well, during the fourth quarter of 2020, I think U.S. retail was about 1.5 trillion, trillion. And in Q1 this year, so Q4 last year, probably the most rich quarter in retail, always Q4 containing holiday, was about 1.5 trillion. And Q1 this year, the weakest quarter, is 1.6 trillion. Oh. So about 8% growth over the best quarter of last year to quite likely the worst quarter of this year. I mean, for me, that shows great light at the end of the tunnel. We're coming out of the gate really strong and using numbers. There's no emotion. There's no debate. It's just a number. It is what it is. And so some of the other things I took from this, really focused on smaller retail. And small retail is defined, I think NRF defines, small retail as having fewer than 50 employees.
Okay.
Right? And small retail rules the retail industry. Small retailers account for 98% of all retail firms. We are the power in retail. Even though we continue to bow to the big chains, we're the ones that hold the power. All right. Small and medium businesses, retail business account for 40% of all employees. Wow. All hired guns, 40% is
Big
made
number.
up in
Yep.
small and medium-sized business. 40% of all retail employees are in small, right? Small or medium-sized retailers have an average gross margin of 51%, which is up from what was 48 in 2019. So our margins are even growing.
Nice.
Big bright sign. So what do I take away from this as somebody listening? Hey, where are my margins? If the average is at 51, where am I? Not how you price it, but rather how you sell it, right? So a pretty cool stat there, giving me this measure. Everybody wants to know, how do I do compared to others? The other thing that kind of caught me by surprise, not surprise, but maybe reminded me of how much power there is in specialty retail. Right now, there's about 131,000 smaller retail stores in the US in 2021. The number of small specialty niche stores, has declined by about 0.8% on average year over year over the last 5 years. So here we sit with 130-some thousand small retailers. And of that, we've got this niche retailer, the one that has carved out a small segment, and they're not seeing any significant decline, which for me, again, is part of that warm, fuzzy feeling. Right now, this number was really cool that Sandeep threw out here. Right now, for every retail store that's closing, or for every company that's closing stores, 5 more are opening.
Holy heck.
Right? So one company's closing a store, there's 5 others that are opening. So the growth pattern that we're seeing in retail right now is crazy high. It used to be more like 1.8 or 2 to 1 closing, 1.8 to 2 reopening, which kept us fairly level. But right now, openings are way outpacing closings, which tells us there's some good shit happening here. The other thing that I took from this, Q1 of this year, 2021, so Q1, January through March 31st, 86% of all retail dollars spent were done in person. So here we've spent a year and a half, screaming from the mountaintop about the power of e-com. Guess what? In Q1, it stayed about the same as it's been for the last 3 or 4 years. It's about 14% is e-com. 86% was done in person. Now, that probably climbed a little bit because of some pent-up demand, but it still means, 2.5 of 3 people that you have the opportunity to engage are going to walk through your front door. How are you prepared to handle them? And a recent study that Retail Dive did stated that 62% of all customers prefer to shop in store because they can see it, touch it, feel it, try items on. The same study said that 49% of customers want to buy from a physical store because of the speed and convenience. Speed and convenience, the two things that, the Amazons of the world are built on. They built their whole model on being convenient and fast at the fingertip. But here we have 50% of customers saying, no. It's much more convenient and quicker for me to stop at my local store to pick up what I need. Pay attention to that.
Yeah.
Right?
Bird in the hand.
Bird in hand. Here's a couple more good stats. 81% of customers discover and evaluate new products in your store. 62% of customers bought more or will buy more than what they initially intended during their in-store shopping. 2/3 of your customers are buying more than they initially intended when they're in your store. Get this one, 67% of customers from this study and Retail Dive admit that they bought something else when they were returning a product. 2 out of 3 customers that are going to return product in your store are going to buy something else. Do we want them in store? Yeah.
Yeah.
Do we want to accept e-com returns in store? Yeah. Right? Ton of really great stats. And again, you need a bit of a pan to siphon through all the shit here.
Yep.
But there was a ton of really great warm and fuzzy feelings. And so, I didn't take from this, Rob. Here are the stats you need to know. Here are some stats that maybe reinforce what you already know or remind you that 2 out of 3 customers actually want to be in your store. How are you prepared for them? What are you doing to welcome them?
Right on. Well, as you said, like just some really optimistic headline, like just to reinforce the fill that positive bucket, and let's keep building on this, folks.
Yeah. Anytime Q1 sales are higher than Q4.
Yeah, totally.
Hey man, something good's happening here.
Yep. Right on. Okay. Well, when the good stuff is happening, probably a good opportunity to spend some time to build up those protections for when the inevitable next piece of bad business comes your way. Yeah. This next story comes from entrepreneur.com. The headline of 6 ways to protect your business from the next disaster. What did you like here, Dan?
Well, I'm going to say, man, isn't our vision clear when we look backwards? Boy, don't we seem really smart when we have the ability to look behind us a year and say, here's what we should have done. But the reality is there are these 6 things, and I've put my own little spin on the 6 of their headings. I used some of their descriptions verbatim, and most of these examples that came out of entrepreneur.com, they used a real life business owner or retailer as an example. So I've spun this a little bit. And so I don't want you to think about this necessarily as protection from disaster, but it's really about business continuity, being able to continue this momentum, be able to continue doing business. So let's just walk through these 6. Number 1 for them was you need to have a diversified supply chain. And here's the deal, man. We definitely saw some pain this year as retailers had way too much invested with too few suppliers. All right. It's important not to have too many apples in one basket. And one of the best ways to begin diversifying right now while you're going to market and shopping is mandating a portion of your budget, of your open to buy dollar, to new or test vendors. My recommendation is always, spend 15 to 25% of your budget on a new vendor, a new product even that you have not yet, or you haven't carried in a while. Go back to a vendor that you used to do business with and see if there's opportunity again. And always have that little piece of predetermined dollar that you're testing vendors with. Now, I'm not saying that I want to see 50 vendors in every category, but I damn sure don't want to see 3, because inevitably it means that one vendor's making up 50% of your volume. And when that vendor has a hiccup like so many had last year, or even in the last year,
you're in trouble.
It cripples us. We've got to broaden our horizons and get away from this is who we've always bought from. That doesn't matter anymore. You got to stretch your wings. You got to diversify. All right. Number 2 was about expanding marketing, right? We need to evaluate where and when we're spending money. There's 2 decent takeaways here for me. Number 1, with greater emphasis on supporting local businesses, we need to let them know that we exist. So LSO, local search optimization, is just as important as SEO. And right now, Rob, we're seeing this massive resurgence in the power of Google because Facebook has gone to shit. The new iOS platforms are restricting us from the data that we used to have. And Google is gaining some power back here. And our marketers are going back, harder to Google than we've seen them in the last 12 to 18 months, where Facebook really reigned supreme as the best place to spend my dollar. So pay attention to local search engine or local search optimization. You got to be out there for your customer, as well as SEO and pay-per-click campaigns.
Yeah.
Right now, number 2 for me certainly is going to go back to our entrance to e-com. We have access to such a wider audience, a much wider audience, and we need to budget, measure, and act on the marketing performance outside your local trading area. I'm on a call yesterday morning with a client who happens to be in the US. He's in Pennsylvania.
Okay.
And he said to me, Dan, we now have customers in 30 states.
Wow.
Right? 18 months ago, we had customers in 2 states.
Wow.
So their reach is much bigger. They're selling to people because of e-com. They're selling to a wider audience. And we've got to make sure that we have measurement in place to properly allocate those dollars where we're seeing the best penetration. So you've got to really look at, how do I expand my marketing? And Rob, I have a predetermined marketing budget. I measure it weekly. And if I'm under, I'm probably not getting as much penetration as I could. And that number, probably lands overall somewhere in that 3 to 5% neighborhood. We used to be 1 to 3 was a good rule of thumb. 1 to 3% of your revenue should be kicked back into marketing. But now it's a little bit more like 3 to 5 because, we're doing much more business online, and that costs us a little more online, but costs us less in typical overhead, as far as your brick and mortar expense. So long-winded answer on the expanded marketing. Number 3 for them was you got to find virtual solutions. Retailers adapted to virtual selling, some with great success, and it cannot be abandoned because our front doors are now wide open.
Right.
Virtual product launches, style showings, and sessions, need to be part of the business plan. Doing business virtually needs to be a complement to what you're doing today. Number 4 was refocused products. Now, I'm going to say what you need to do is really look at your assortment and add those feel-good products into your mix. Think about sustainability, therapeutic ability, cause-driven, the feel-good products. In an apparel store, maybe it's a candle that takes me somewhere else, or a chocolate-covered licorice, or popcorn. There's always something that I can add in that delivers a little feel-good that allows me maybe to expand my average sale. All right. Number 5 is provide human support. While it's always been true, this pandemic has made it clearer than ever. We've got to ensure that our team feels valued, respected, and supported, and they'll help our business weather any storm. We've got to double down on employee support by improving, benefits, embracing flexible schedules, and actively encouraging people to take the PTO, the personal time off that they need. Our businesses are only as strong as the people who work there. And I know we're going to talk about in the next article, this talent war, but let's just put this in our mind. Let's hold on to this placeholder and remember that our team has to feel valued, respected, and supported in order for them to weather our storm with us. Or even for us. Okay. Number 6 for them, was you've got to make new relationships. And I added to this, repair broken ones.
Oh, okay.
We've got to expand our circle of influence. And this means in every aspect of the business, customers, vendors, partners, staff, our marketing strategies. It is these strong relationships that get us through the tough shit we deal with every single day. Never mind the next disaster. You've got to make and repair relationships, right? You've got to be expanding your circle of influence. And there's no doubt that there's been some thorns in a few relationships in the last 18 months. And now's the time for you to say, hey, for the greater good of my business, I'm going to repair all my broken relationships. I don't burn bridges. I do my best not to burn bridges. And every retailer's got to be thinking that way. How do I protect myself? I expand my relationships.
Yeah. I love that. Yeah, that's great. And I'd say, expand on those relationships too, not just, your vendors and that, like, customers he lost, the finding some
customers, staff, vendors, partners, all of it. Yeah,
so many great ways. And
agreed.
Some really good takeaways there. And I I think it was business in general, but boy, like right down to the retailer out there, and just some good reminders of it talked about disaster and good little headline we'll call it, but we're just talking like these are just great business practices, and some things you were forced to do because of a disaster, but honestly these are good things to keep doing. So don't abandon them now, and all of a sudden 11th hour you got to pull them back into your operation.
And Rob, this is why I want us to think about continuity, not disaster, right? Everybody, and especially in the tech world, has some level of disaster recovery. Well, this isn't about disaster recovery. This is about the ability to continue doing business no matter what. So yeah, think business continuity, not disaster. You're a media guy. You loved the headline. Disaster, right? That's what they do to get us.
World ends tomorrow.
This podcast is brought to you by Canadian Retail Solutions. We've been empowering retailers across North America for 30 years with the latest in point-of-sale technology, best-in-class support, merchandise intelligence with open-to-buy planning, and much more. CRS has the retail solution to help take your retail business to the next level of success. Visit retailbycrs.com to learn more. Remember, Canadian Retail Solutions exists to help make you, the independent retailer, better.
Okay, Dan. Well, you touched on it in the previous story, that war for talent. And I'm kind of curious, that stat you talked about in the first story, that for every one closure, 5 are opening. Were these former staff, do you think, that are going out on their own and started? But it's a challenge out there. And what do you got to say here?
Well, that's a great point. Here, I was on a call this morning with a client, and she said 2 of my staff have opened stores. Wow. So it does happen. Yeah. It does happen. And quite frankly, no matter where you're located on the continent, there is a war for talent. And the war is on. And this article from the Times Colonist in Eastern Canada highlights how some of the retailers there are dealing with their employment shortages in Nova Scotia. Nova Scotia is not any different than any other province in Canada. There is a war on for talent. There's always been a war on for good talent, but now it seems like there's a war for all talent. And for these guys, and there's a story in here that we'll talk about a specific retailer, okay. Fluffy Bottom Babies in Sunnyside Mall in Bedford, Nova Scotia.
Great handle.
Yeah, I know. When it came out, when it said, hey, increasing wages just wasn't enough, this Halifax area baby boutique teamed up with other retail operators in a small suburban mall to turn part-time sales jobs into full-time jobs. So people have more than one job maybe. And she went and talked to other tenants in the mall who are also finding it hard to attract workers. And Ivy Liu, is her name, Ivy is the owner of Fluffy Bottom Babies, said, we came up with a plan that if we can find the right worker, but they want full-time, they can work 2 days here and 3 days here or vice versa. And this is just one retailer's stab at breaking the mold. Retailers and restaurateurs are faced with this significant challenge brought on by our, me, never one to hammer on political guys, but here we are. This challenge that we're in today is brought on by our political leaders. And now it's time that they step up with a solution for businesses. And I'll say, at first glance, Rob, the employment subsidization that was offered to businesses sounded great. But, when the public is paid when those frontline retail employees are paid as much to sit at home as they are to go out to work, this subsidization that we've given, the Qs and the Kers and all this other shit, it doesn't do jack shit for us. We need to be really creative with our employment and remuneration offerings, or these people aren't coming back to work anytime soon. And it's not just about us paying them more. It's about helping our people make a better life. We've heard this saying for forever, right? Stop making a living and start making a life. And that means that we've got to look at, just as we talked about earlier, improving benefits, flexible schedules, time off, and most importantly, pay for performance. retailers, we will never win a labor war paying minimum wage. Even $1 more isn't going to change your outcome. And I want to say this: if you're that retailer that's in this war for talent and you're putting ads out, think about who you're advertising to. You're advertising to the unemployed.
Yep.
Is that who you want to come and work for you? No. Forever we've heard this saying or statement: good people aren't looking for work, they're already working. Right? There's two types of people that respond to ads. People that are unhappy. I don't want to start with an unhappy person, right? They're
Great
working
point.
but unhappy.
Yep.
And they're unemployed. Now, this isn't for all, Rob. This is just an example of what you're going to see when you put an ad out there. You're going to get people that are unhappy or that are already unemployed. God damn it, I don't want unemployed people coming to work for me. I've got to go find people. Winning the war for talent, sends you out on the street looking for that right person. Yep. And, as I talked about with Tammy from Sweet Elizabeth Jane this morning, my friend Bruce Kirkland from Lexus of Edmonton, did a great job saying, on a podcast last year or 2019 maybe, said to us, I don't hire people from within my industry. I go to the industry where, I want that type of personality. He hires for his retail car dealership, what he believes is a retail store. He hires from hospitality and entertainment.
Yep.
Right? And never hires somebody that's not working. And
he's always got the scouting hat on. Right.
Yep. Right. And I said this to Tammy, you're looking for somebody, go to your coffee shop, go to your favorite restaurant, go, and just when someone moves you, take note of it. Maybe give them a card. Yep. Right? The war for talent isn't going away. It just is challenged today. And I think in Canada, in this last quarter, we put about 230,000 people back to work. A lot of them may not have gone back to retail or restaurant. And as restaurants have opened, those people that have had no choice, that were furloughed or laid off or whatever, went back to that job. And so now they're going back into a place where they're maybe feeling a little bit unloved. Right? The restaurant owners let them go. The retail owners that let them go, laid them off. Maybe they don't feel the same love. You need to get out there and talk to them.
Yep.
That's how you're going to win a war.
Well, I love the idea too of you might be prospecting for new talent, but lo and behold too, you're also doing a little marketing for your own store that, hey, you pay someone a compliment by, you really impressed me with your work ethic today. I'd love to talk to you down the road. Oh, where is that? Well, I'm going to come visit that. Dan, just to pick on that one thing you said about a retailer having a couple staff going and starting their own, is this something that, should your independent retailers be looking at ways or thoughts to incubate some of that entrepreneurship within their team and run with it? Yeah. Or is that just fly, be free? And I'm glad I took you to a place.
No, and there's two schools of thought here. There's one, you'll remember we chatted with Doug Webster from Staples, and Doug really believes that he has this twofold responsibility: curate, young people to put them in a better position for the workforce, after college.
Yeah.
And then he fosters career-minded people. So he's got these two avenues. Well, in our retail store, it has to be the same. There does need to be a level of incubation. And I asked Tammy this question this morning, what's your succession plan?
Right.
Why aren't you incubating these great workers? And I think we've talked about this a few times. Rob, the incubation of that entrepreneurial spirit is very powerful in your store, right? Find that person that really has the desire to own and operate their own store. Well, maybe there's an opportunity for them to own and operate your store, right? And curating people that have the ability, to elevate in your business is critical in the go forward. You should be incubating. And if people are going to go and open their own stores, well, you're putting them in a better position, right? You're creating a better retailer. Also important, right? Let's create better retailers by you incubating that in your store, instead of being, oh, that sumbitch went and opened a store. Now she's trying to steal my products. Well, that's looking at the negative, not the positive.
Yeah, totally. Great point. Okay. Question of the week talks about, let's talk about taking care of ourselves, suffering a little bit of that burnout. It's been an interesting, tough, challenging year and a half. What do you say to retailers when you get this question, Dan?
Well, so I got this question from Carol, and it said, "Hey, hi, Dan. Good morning, Dan." I should read it. I shouldn't just ad-lib it. It says, "Good morning, Dan. I've owned my store for almost 8 years and feeling really tired this summer. Can you share some tips or advice on dealing with burnout? P.S. I love this part. I had to put it down. P.S. I listen to your podcast every week,
Nice.
And each week I learn or relearn something about retail. Thank you, Carol." Well, Carol, as I said, now here's the thing. I don't know where Carol's from. All I had was the email, no phone number, no nothing, no store name. So I just sent Carol an email and said, of course, thank you very much with a little love heart. I love that you listen to the podcast and that you get something out of it, and super appreciative of the question, because we all feel burnout. And this isn't just about retail burnout. This is about entrepreneurial burnout, no matter what business you're in. And I'm going to preface, as I did for Carol, this sort of response by saying it's imperative that you have the ability to separate the real from the bullshit. Okay. You've got to know when you're using an excuse versus a reason. And Rob, important sort of to highlight here, every single one of us at some point feels burnt out. And the biggest contributor to burnout in any business is our inability to see the light at the end of the tunnel, right? It gets dark and dreary. We can't see the light. We don't lift our head up. We don't take a deep breath, and we begin to burn out, right? The inability to see a different tomorrow than you're experiencing today creates burnout. And for me, I really had to think about how I wanted to respond to this, because again, I'm a guy that gets burnt out. I sometimes work more than maybe I want to or should or whatever. And, I feel like I'm banging my head against the wall and you get burnt out. So I kind of looked at, well, what things do I do when I start feeling like I'm a bit burnt out? And number one for me, to avoid burnout, you got to have vision. You got to have a vision. You got to have a dot on the map that you're working towards. Every day can't just happen. It has to happen with intention. Yeah. And by not having a vision, we hit the ceiling. We hit this entrepreneurial ceiling. We don't know where we're going. And what we're experiencing today feels like it's just going to replicate itself over and over and over again. And today can't just happen. It has to happen with intention. All right. Want to avoid burnout? Create a good vision. Work towards something where you can start checking it off the list. And for me, this is kind of rolled right into number 2. You want to avoid burnout, you got to be an obedient follower to a predetermined schedule. Now, you've heard this before. He's a slave to the calendar. He spends all day on to-dos and blah, 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 blah. I'm not saying overrun yourself. I'm saying you need to be an obedient follower of a predetermined schedule. You create the schedule. Be a great time manager. Schedule yourself accordingly, ensuring that you're building in clarity breaks and hair and nail appointments and soccer games and wine Wednesdays. All right? It's got to be built. All right? I look at clients' calendars and I generally see 2 things. Emptiness, right? Or a calendar so full of to-dos with no personal time built in that it just creates this burnout. There is no reprieve, right? You've got to build in your clarity breaks. You've got to build in, and I tell this to my team, don't ever bullshit me about what's in your calendar. If you've got to go to a barber or a hair appointment or, take your kid to the dentist, just put it in there. It's part of our life, and that's part of being flexible. And we've got to do that ourselves. I am never embarrassed to share my calendar with someone because it's got, 2 afternoons off a week to play golf. Yeah. Right? That's part of my clarity. That's part of the most frustrating game in the frickin' world. I'm never happy when I leave the golf course. I'm happy to get there.
As long as you got one good shot in, that's what brings you back.
But you see, I build that into my day.
Yeah.
And so now I have this clarity, this free time to look forward to that helps alleviate the burnout. And now I'm going to go back and say, remember what I said, you got to be able to separate the real from the bullshit. Everybody that says I can't, it's bullshit, right? It's about how you structure yourself and using this assistant, all right? Assistant, calendar, checklist, whatever. If I use it as my checklist of accomplishments, making sure what gets in there gets done, and that there's balance between, what's important now and what's achievable now. These two things have to coexist. Otherwise, a to-do isn't worth to-doing, right? You've got to balance when and when, what's important and what's achievable. If you're spending all your time on what you believe is important but not yet achievable, burnout's knocking on your back door. Right? Focus your energy on both important and achievable. Knock things off your to-do list. Feel this great sense of accomplishment. There's pride in accomplishment, and it'll alleviate that feeling of burnout. Right? The other thing, I'm going to just say it again because it's important. If you're not building me time into your calendar of events, into your day, you're going to burn yourself out. Right? Number 3 for me, my number 3 takeaway, what do I do when I'm feeling burnt out? I fill my bucket. I get burnt out when my bucket's empty, not when my bucket overfloweth, right? So you've got to figure out what fills my bucket. Is it family time? Is it vacation time? Is it, going to a trade show and being inspired by those around me? Does that fill my bucket? And filling your bucket should be always the first thing you do. We've said this, we've heard this, we preach this, we practice this. I can't fill your bucket, brother, if my bucket's empty. I got nothing to fill it with.
Great point.
Right? And for some of us, the bucket overfloweth when we spend more time with our loved ones, when we, spend more alone time, when we take that walk, or when we do travel, or we go to trade shows, or we be inspired. When I listen to a great podcast, I maybe get a little bit of inspiration that's feeding into my bucket. You want to prevent burnout? It's so easy. It's so easy. Easy, maybe easier said than done. Have a vision. Be an obedient follower of your schedule, not someone else's, and fill your bucket. Every single day, do something that refills or helps to refill your bucket. If you do that, burnout is not really one of our conversations. Conversations are more like, how do I take advantage of this opportunity? I'm too effing tired for this.
That's great, Dan. Great advice. That I don't care what business you're in, you can take that one and you can start filling your bucket today. It's almost like you want something done, go ask the busiest person in the room, and
it's true
because their bucket's full, and I love the you can't give nothing if you got an empty bucket on that front. So
it's true.
I'm sure there's some other questions out there. How do folks connect, Dan?
Carol, I'm going to say this again. Thank you so much, not just for listening to the podcast, but finding some value in it and then taking advantage of an opportunity to throw a question or a challenge out there. I hope the spoken word comes off better than the written word that you got from me on Monday. And if other retailers have questions, Rob, we've said this before. I don't care what the topic is. I don't care if it's not even about your retail store. Send me a question with something that you're challenged with. Send it to dan@thewealthyretailer.com, and I promise we'll get an answer that will help to fill your bucket and inspire some change for you. Dan@thewealthyretailer.com. The other thing you've got to do, if you're listening to this podcast, send us a comment on the podcast, share it to your friends. Make sure that you're subscribed to our weekly newsletter. Comes out every Friday morning. I think it's 6 a.m. Mountain Time. Rob's up all night long preparing this thing. He's going to throw in all the headlines that we talked about today.
Hacking away at that typewriter.
Hacking away. All the headlines from today. Copies of the retailer question, or a reminder this week about the Summertime 9. Had lots of great feedback about the Summertime 9. We'll make sure that it's in the weekly newsletter again. Awesome. You can subscribe to that thing over at retailbycrs.com. get it in your box, get some good relevant stuff. And I think, Rob, you've got 3 other stories that we're going to
a few other stories. There's one headline, it just jumped at me, that Lemonade Day, and I'm like, what the heck is this? And read into it, and long story short, you can read it yourself, but just a great example of how these folks packaged something and really made it theirs, and a great takeaway on that.
And if Kendra Scott isn't somebody that you follow or are infatuated with in retail, well, this will push you over the limit, because this is fabulous.
Right on. And another one, some different words have not come, a data diet, and I thought, this is interesting. Retailers need a data diet. Yeah. And so I'm sure that'll be of interest to a few folks. And you talked about it earlier with our stats, and it's a keep on trucking, but our back to school spending expected to increase by, they're saying, 16% year over year. So a story on that as well as the links to the story we covered today. Great job, Dan.
Yeah, thank you. You too, sir. Can't wait to do it again. See you next week.